Hello and welcome. In this video, let's understand how we can execute stored procedures which are having a table valued parameter. I have this table employee and you can see it is having these many records. And what I have done, I have created a table type. Table type is nothing but a type in database using which we can pass multiple result set to the procedure. So what I will do, I will take first name, last name and earnings in this table type, and I will use this table type in my procedure, that is create multiple employees. As the name suggests, this will create multiple employees in the database. So I'm taking all the employees in data variable, and this variable is of type employee data, and using this table type variable I am inserting into employee table. Now let's go to Visual Studio and understand how we can execute these kind of procedures. Okay, so I have opened up my Visual Studio. In order to execute procedures which are having a table valued parameter, what we need to do, we need to create a class that will represent that table type. So if you see in database, right, we have this table type. So let's create a class in C# that will be equivalent to this table type, meaning that will have the same properties as the column name which are defined here. Okay, so let's do that. So I will go to my Visual Studio, I will right click on my project and I will select add and I will click on class. I will name my class employee create request, because using this class we will be sending a request to the procedure to create multiple employees. So let's name the class as employee create request. Let's make it public and add the properties just like the columns we have in the table data type. So if we see the table data type, we have first name with F name, last name, and earnings. So let's add this in our C# class also. So I have added the three properties, first name, last name, and earning. Once that is done, let's go back to program.cs class. Here, let's create a list of employee create request. So I have added three objects and I have provided the first name, last name, and the earning of that employee. So we want to add these three employees to our employee table. So this was our step 2. Now the third step is we need to convert this employee data from list to a data table, because Dapper can only understand data table. We cannot directly pass this list to Dapper functions. To convert this list to a data table, let's create an extension method. So first let's add a class. I will name this class as extension methods container, because in this class we are going to add an extension method. Let's make it public and static. Once that is done, now let's our extension method. So this is my extension method and it will return a data table. I have created this as a generic because I want to use it for different type of lists. For example, I can also have a product create request, but I can use the same method for my that particular list also. So this extension method can handle any type of list because I have created this as a generic type. So I have specified two parameter here. First one is with this keyword, because on this type of object, I will be able to invoke this method, right? And the second parameter is optional. We can specify the table name, meaning the data table name which we want to give. By default, I will be using the my table here. Now, let's create an object of data table. So I will say data table equal to new data table, and I can pass my table name in this constructor. Right? So this will create an instance of data table. So I have added a if check here. If the data is null or data.count is 0, then just return the table from here. No need to do any further processing. But if it is not the case, then we need to read the properties which are present in my type. Meaning in this case, I will be iterating through properties which are mentioned here. So to get the properties, we can invoke get properties method. So let's create a variable of properties. and let's get the type of T. And once we get the type of T, I can invoke get properties method from this. So this will give me three properties because I have specified three properties here. Now let's iterate through these properties and add columns to our data table based on the property names. So what I'm doing, I'm using this table variable which is of data table, and I'm accessing the columns property, and I'm adding a column here, and the name of the column will be same as the name of the property. And to specify the type of this column, I am using the type of the property. So to get the property type, I am using property dot property type, right? This will give us the type of the property, meaning if my property is of string type, this will give string there. Once that is done, meaning now we have our columns, now we need to add rows in our data table. To add the rows, let's iterate through the data which we are receiving here, because based on this data only we need to insert rows in our data table. So let's again use a for each loop and create a data row. So I am using dot new row method to create a row. Now we need to iterate through these properties and add the row values, meaning we need to add the data in the cell, right? So let's do a for each loop here. Once we are here, let's say row, and access the cell by using the column name. Column name will be nothing but the property name, right? And in that cell, so I am accessing a cell here. So I'm using the row and specifying which column I want to access. So in this cell, I want to store the data. So to store the data, let's say, so what we are doing, we are using the get value method here, and we are getting the data which is available in this particular item, right? And adding that into that particular cell. And if that data is null here, right? So I am using this question mark operator. If the data is null here, I will be passing that db null dot value. So I'll be passing a null value to the database. And finally, after doing this, so I will be preparing one row here, and I will be adding this row back to our table. So I will say table dot rows dot add, where I will be adding this particular row, which is now having all the values which are available in our data. All right. So this is how I will be adding these rows. And finally, we can return our table. It is a complex process. So let's once again understand what we have done. First, we have created a data table. Okay. And then we have added the columns. Then we are adding rows. And finally, we are returning the table. Okay, so these are the steps. First step was creating the data table. Second step was creating the columns, and we have created the columns based on the properties that are available in our type T. In our case, that will be our employee create request. So these are the properties. So there will be three columns in our data table. And once we have the columns, we are adding the rows using the data which we are receiving here. And this data will be binded to the row cells here. And once the data is added, we are adding that row back to the table. Once our table is prepared, we are returning that table. Now our extension method is ready. Now we can come back to our program.cs, and we can change this employee data to a data table. So let's do that. So I will say variable data table equal to employee data dot to data table, and I can specify the type here, that will be employee create request, and let's pass the table type also. So I will be specifying employee data, because if you see in the database, right, I have the type with employee data name. So that's why I'm naming my table also with employee data, and no need to specify the type here because C# will understand the type from this object because we are invoking this employee data on this list of employee create request. So this type will be automatically inferred here. So we can ignore this. Once that is done, now let's create a dynamic parameters object and add the parameter which we have just created, parameter dot add, and I will be specifying the name of the parameter as @data because if you see in our procedure, the parameter name is @data here. And finally, I need to pass the value of this parameter, that is nothing but our data table. So data table, and I need to call as table valued parameter method. And within this, I need to say employee data. Once our parameters are ready, now we are ready to execute our store procedure. So on our connection object, we can call execute. And we need to pass two parameters here. First one is the procedure name, and second one is the parameters. So let's pass the parameter first. And let's copy the SP name from database. So this is my SP name. I will copy this and put it right here. So I have passed down my SP name, my parameters. Let's give the command type also. So I have specified the command type as StoredProcedure. Now we are ready to execute our code. Okay, before execution, let's see the rows in the employee table. So currently we have 10 rows, and after the execution, there should be 13 rows because these 3 employees we are trying to add in our database. Let's run our application. Okay, so our application ran successfully, and now let's check our database. Execute this query again, and now you can see we are getting 3 more rows, that is Mark, Scott, and Travis. And you can notice here these were the employees that we have added from our C# code. So our program is working as expected. And this is how you can execute a stored procedure which is having a table type parameter. I know these steps are very tedious and bit complex, but let's recap what we have done. So this was the table type that was available in the database. So what we have done, we have created a class here that is matching the columns which are available in database, right? Once that is done, in the program.cs class, we have created a list of employee create request and added the data here. Once we have this list, we converted this list to a data table using two data table method that we have created as an extension method in our extension method container class. So we used this method to convert that list to a data table. Once we have our data table ready, now it's very simple. Now we just have to create a dynamic parameters object and add that parameter using the AsTableValuedParameter method, right? And we need to specify the type here, right? This is the table type in the database, so we need to specify that here. Once it is done, we can execute our SP by specifying the SP name, the parameters, and the command type as stored procedure. So that's it for this video, guys. In the next video, we will understand how we can execute stored procedures which are having an output type parameter.